Live. Okay, welcome to the 21st edition of GraphQL Berlin Meetup. While this meetup has started in Berlin, we're now able to bring together the global GraphQL community with this online format. I'm your host, Daniel from Prisma, and today we have two amazing speakers and a special prize. Our speakers will be Benny Powers, who will talk about how to build GraphQL web components that work across frameworks. And that will be followed by a talk by Yves Porcello, who will give us an introduction to some of the latest features to the GraphQL spec, specifically the defer and the stream features. We'll also be running a quiz, and in order to participate in the quiz, you can join by either scanning this QR code or entering the link.
You need to share your presentation. We don't see it, so we don't see the code either.
Okay. Yeah, sorry.
Alrighty, sorry to have jumped in.
Okay, yes, sorry about that. Okay, yes, so you can join the quiz either by scanning this QR code that you see on the screen or by entering the URL in your browser. And the quiz will run throughout the event. And it's worth noting that the quicker you answer the questions, the higher the chances of winning. And so the first prize that we have, the winner of the quiz, will receive access to Wes Boss's updated full stack advanced React and GraphQL course. And in case you're not familiar, Wes Boss is a great instructor. And specifically, this course has been revamped recently. And the tech stack that it uses is React, Apollo Client, and Keystone.js. So I highly recommend it. You can also just check it out on his website. And then the two runner-ups will also win something. We've prepared a Prisma swag pack. So the two runner-ups will get a t-shirt and some Prisma stickers. So if you've already joined the Slido, we'd love to hear where you're joining us from. So the Slidos should be open and would love to hear. We have already Sonia Burlan, who's joining us from Israel. So welcome, Sonia. And Francisco is also joined. And we have Connie Loing, who's joined us from Hong Kong. So it's really lovely to see that you're all joining. Alex is joining us from Kenya. And let's see, I'm not seeing anyone quite yet joining. Okay, it could be that I need to reload the presentation so that you can see the results. So I'm going to remove my screen for a moment, and then I'll re-add it. Let's see. Okay. Yes, present the Slido. And let's see if we get the results now. Oh, yes, we're getting the results. Great. So we have Johannesburg, South Africa, Bangkok, Poland, Latvia, Kenya, Canada, Berlin, just behind you. Oh, let me check. There's no one behind me. That's a bit of a relief. Rafa is joining us from Barcelona. We have Brazil, Minneapolis, Russia, Israel, the Netherlands. Wow, so we're really covering the whole globe. Belarus, Mexico. So welcome all. And on that note, I think we can continue. So, a moment. All right, let's make this full screen. Okay, so I'd like to introduce our first speaker for today, and that is Benny Powers. Benny works as a senior software engineer at Acquainted, and he's the author of Apollo Elements. He currently lives in Israel after having moved from Canada and specializes in progressive web apps using open web standards like custom elements, the Shadow DOM, and service workers. Fun fact about Benny, he graduated from rabbinic studies and speaks fluent Hebrew. So now without any further delay, I bring you Benny Powers.
Hi, shalom everybody. My name is Benny.
Hi Benny, nice to have you.
Hey. Thank you, I'm very excited to be here.
So I won't take up any more of your time, and I want to give you the stage. Are you ready to share your screen?
Yeah, you can see my slides now? Great.
There we go.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Okay, great. So today we're going to talk a little bit about how to build apps with web components and GraphQL. And in my opinion, being the author of this library, I think the best way to do that is Apollo Elements. So let's dive in. Apollo Elements, at its core, is a library of base classes, mix-ins, and other helpers, functions, and web components that help you build web apps with web components and GraphQL. With Apollo Elements, you can build whole entire complicated front-end dashboards, or you can build, are we together? Yeah. Or you can build these complicated dashboards, or you can build isolated, reusable, encapsulated components for use in other apps. You can write your GraphQL components once, have them in one place, and use them across multiple apps, multiple frameworks, different teams. It's Apollo client, but it's web components. So some of you might not be familiar with what a web component is, how it works, so let's have a brief introduction. What is a web component? Every web component, also called custom element, is essentially a JavaScript class that extends from HTML element. Inside that class, you get from the browser some built-in lifecycle callbacks that you can use to define the DOM, the HTML contents, and the behavior of your element. So a typical web component might look something like this. You might instantiate your element in the constructor and then create a shadow root which you'll add some content to. And a shadow root is kind of like an isolated section of DOM. It has its own CSS, its own DOM tree. It's isolated from the rest of the app. Just a note, for the sake of brevity on this slide, I'm not using template elements, and I'm using inner HTML instead. But normally, you'd want to use a template element, something like that, for performance. But so in this web component, we have like a little span that gets the host component's emoji attribute, injects that into the shadow DOM, and sets up a little empty paragraph element. Simple. Once you define a tag name, in our case, person element, using the global method customelements.define, and pass in your class, that becomes a web component. And then you can use that HTML element anywhere on your page. So one of the cool things about web components is that they're just HTML. Like a person element now, it's just an HTML element. You can put it anywhere, but you get to define how it behaves, what it does in the document, how it interacts with the rest of the page. So what would it look like to write custom elements that used GraphQL? Well, when we think about GraphQL, we think about queries representing data, right? So you define a slice of data using a query. If we had a web component that used GraphQL, we would have essentially a piece of UI that's a function of our GraphQL query. So here's an example of our person element from before, but this time we're extending not just from HTML element, but we're going to mix in the Apollo query mixin, which comes from Apollo elements. And that's going to give us a bunch of GraphQL-related behaviors. First thing we can do is assign our query to the element. So this could be our person query, for example. Let's say maybe you have an ID to get a specific person, and you're going to query for that person by ID, getting the name, the picture, and the list of friends, each of them with a name. What we can do now inside of our custom element class body is we can implement this attribute changed callback. That's one of those built-in lifecycle callbacks that I mentioned earlier. What that gives us is the ability to watch every time a specified attribute changes. We can grab the new value or the old value or do some logic. In our case, what we want to do is set the variables property, and we're going to set it with the ID being the contents of the person ID attribute. And because of the Apollo query mixin, when we do that, when we assign a query and we give it our variables, at that point, it's going to go out automatically and send its query off to your GraphQL server and bring back the data. Now, in order to give our elements, the ability to react to changes in the data, we'll just write a getter setter pair. And every time new data comes in on the element's data property, it'll just call some render callback, which we can define ourselves. In this case, we'll just populate that empty paragraph element from before with some text based on who the user's friends are. So that's kind of a simple, very vanilla HTML and JavaScript example of how you might use Apollo elements to define a query component. In this case, one that goes and gets a person by ID, grabs its list of friends according to the GraphQL query that we passed in, and then renders some rudimentary DOM here. In our case, just writing out a list of that person's friends. But you can get the idea that what we're doing here is defining our component template contents based on the contents of our data. Based on the contents of our data. So we can use this component in any page. All we have to do is bring in the script that defines it, that calls custom elements.define, and then chop it down into our page. We're good to go. If we publish this to NPM, maybe we publish it alongside a specific Apollo client instance, which would go and get our endpoint. Apologies for that. We can maybe package up our component with a specific Apollo client instance, which would go to our specific GraphQL endpoint. Or we could also add it to the document via the usual DOM APIs. It's just HTML and JavaScript. But we're not limited in Apollo Elements just to using the bare bones web components spec, which can kind of be a little bit clunky and cumbersome, very imperative. There's a whole ecosystem, a whole community of interesting and ergonomic components libraries, which can help us to build those declarative templates that we want and match declarative data from our queries. Here's an example of how we build that person component using lit elements and most other web component libraries. We'll grab the Apollo query base class and the lit HTML template tag Apollo elements. We're also going to import our query, our GraphQL query, some CSS styles, and some TypeScript types. The query we're going to roll up plugin in order to convert it to a JavaScript object. Same thing with the CSS. Lit element has its own CSS object format. So we'll use some build system to bring that in for us. I would like this style of development because then you can have sort of like in one directory, you can have like your styles, your template, and your functions, and then your GraphQL. And anyone who wants to know about that component can go in and pick one. So this is how our component from before might look if we were using lit elements. We would set up this person ID property. The person ID in camel case DOM property relates to the person-ID HTML attribute. So every time either the attribute changes or something sets the property will get updated. And when we get updated, if the person ID changes, we're going to set the variables property just like we did before, and that will initialize our query and start getting our data. Then we can render out our template.
Hey, Benny, sorry to cut you off.
Template like we did before, having our list of friends inside.
Benny, sorry to cut you off. It seems that we're having some technical troubles, and the sound and video is rather choppy. Okay, I'm apologizing for the technical difficulties that we're experiencing. It's we're trying to debug that. So I have a suggestion. maybe we can bring Eve on stage while Benny figures out his technical situation, and let's double check with Eve. Natalia, could you double check if Eve is? Yeah, Eve is ready. Okay, cool. So I'm going to give Eve a short introduction, and let me just go ahead and do that. So, all right. So hopefully Eve's connection is a bit better. And Eve Porcello, in case you're not familiar, she's a software engineer, instructor, author, and co-founder of Moon Highway. She started her career writing technical specifications and creating UX designs for web projects. And since starting Moon Highway in 2012, she has created video content for Egghead and LinkedIn Learning, and has co-authored Learning React and Learning GraphQL for O'Reilly Media. The book has been the main prize also at the previous event, in case you attended it. She's also a frequent conference speaker and has presented at conferences including React Rally, GraphQL Summit, and OSCON. She has a background in theater, improv, and sketch comedy. So now I bring you Eve Porcello. Hi, Eve.
Hi, how's it going?
Well, it's rather stressful with all of these technical difficulties.
Yes.
But hopefully your connection is a bit better and we can figure this out.
I hope so too. Last week I was teaching a class and I got all the power shut off at 9:05 after I had started the class at 9. And so I feel the pain of a technical difficulty very viscerally right now. So
Yeah.
Hopefully my power can stay on and we can make it through today. But thank you very much for having me.
Great. It's great having you here. Do you want to share your screen?
Yes, I do.
Righto.
There we go.
Okay, cool.
Awesome.
All right, so the stage is yours.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me today. Again, my name is Eve Porcello. You can find me on the internet at Eve Porcello. You can send me an email, eve@moonhighway.com, if any questions come up. Official hello. I'm coming to you live from Tahoe City, California today, where I work at Moon Highway. We teach a lot of JavaScript classes. So in addition to that, we create curriculums for all sorts of classes. For LinkedIn Learning, we talked about all this. I'm going to go through this quickly. Another thing that we're working on now is this course, GraphQLworkshop.com. So do take some time to check out that site. It's very cool. And we have a free email course running if you sign up there. So, I wanted to take a step back and talk about a philosophical question. My philosophical question is, how do you get things done? So when I think about how I get things done, I think about the new year. I think about resolutions. I think about all of the things that on January 1st I want to accomplish. I'm a very resolution-oriented person because my birthday is on January 2nd. So I feel like as my year starts, so does the year for everybody. So I feel a lot of pressure. I feel a lot of stress to come up with a good resolution and be a better version of myself every single year. So every year it sort of looks like this. I'm going to wake up and I'm going to exercise every morning at 5:30. I'm going to cook vegan every day. I'm going to spend hours cooking. I'm going to meditate 3 times a day. I'm going to triple my business sales. And I'm going to call my worst relatives once a week. So I go hard at resolutions. But by January 3rd, I have given up. I'm eating ice cream for dinner because I've bitten off more than I can chew. So this makes me think a little bit about queries. So when we think about how we get stuff done, we want to think about how does a GraphQL query get stuff done? So a query typically looks like this. We send a query to a GraphQL endpoint over HTTP, and then we get back some data. And it's going to wait for all of the fields to get that data back. So typically kind of the story of GraphQL becomes we request only the data we want, and then we get back a response that looks just like that request. However, sometimes that request has a lot of different fields. Let's think about how a mutation gets things done. So mutation gets things done by taking in a few details about what we want to change, like setting the lift status at a ski resort. Then our response looks exactly the same as this, matching up all of those different fields. We also have subscriptions in GraphQL. And the way that subscriptions get things done is we send them over WebSockets. Unlike our queries and mutations, all of our subscriptions are sent over WebSockets, and then we set up a listener. So we're going to wait to see whenever a lift changes, and then we're going to get back all of these responses. And I should have animated those better, but you know what I meant. They should come back one at a time, anytime the data changes. So our clients are going to be informed. So that is what is included in the GraphQL spec. We got the queries. Think of those as fetches from our APIs. We got mutations. Those are going to write data. And then subscriptions. So we think about these as being, and they're defined as such, long-lived requests that fetch data in response to these events. So you can find all this information in this thing called the GraphQL spec. So the GraphQL spec, if we scroll up to the top, this is this document that is constantly being worked on by a very awesome group of people. And they are going to be responsible for really the future of the language. So anything that's part of the GraphQL spec is here. And for a long time, we've had the query, the mutation, and the subscription as our operations for making this work. But like I said, we have these really good big queries, right? We might have tons of different fields on this cat, and I need to wait for all of them to be fulfilled. That sounds a whole lot like my resolution. I'm trying to do too much in a single request. So maybe if at the beginning of the year, when I'm thinking about my resolutions, if I just broke things down a little bit, maybe instead of exercising every morning for an hour at 5:30 in the morning, even though I don't really wake up at 5:30 in the morning, I can walk outside for 5 minutes. Maybe I can eat one vegetable. Instead of meditating 3 times a day, maybe I can just take 1 minute to breathe. Maybe I can send out an email to our list. And then maybe I can't call my worst relative once a week. I can text my okay cousin, the cousin I sort of get along with. So in life, we can think about, and there are tons of books about this, atomic habits, tiny habits, things like that. We want to take a huge chunk of stuff and break it down into smaller bits. Over time, it's going to feel like we're not getting as far as we want to, but those little tiny habits are going to add up over time. The same goes with this query. So my big old query here on the left, I can instead think about breaking this down. So I can break it down into a couple of fields, then maybe this extra information, maybe I don't need to know my cat's astrological sign right away. I can load that later, and then that will subsequently load on the page. So this is where we're at now. We have these 2 awesome new features that are going to be part of the GraphQL spec called Defer and Stream. And they're going to help us to break down our requests into smaller chunks. So the idea of Defer was first brought up at GraphQL Europe in 2016, which is a long time ago at this point. But all of these proposals are being actively worked on right now. So there's this blog on the Apollo GraphQL blog that was written in 2016 after that announcement that is this image that I've thought about for a long time. And this is kind of how Defer is put together. So with Defer, well, I should start over here. Without Defer, we're going to wait for all of our data to be ready, and then it's going to load. So we got that loading spinner up there for a while. We know about loading spinners after today. Sometimes internet connections can be slow. So over here on the right, we're saying, all right, load the first information first, and then go ahead and load this information later. So you're prioritizing based on where this is in the page. And this is going to allow the user to have a bump in perceived performance. In other words, it feels like this website is fast. And then we can start to prioritize that data as we're fetching. This is what this looks like inside of a query. So the defer directive is added on a field here on a fragment. So we can create a fragment called extraneous cat details. It'll give us a bunch of extra fields that we want to load. Name, location, birth location, and weight will load first. Then we'll defer. This will fork the process, and then those fields will be passed to the client once they're ready. The other piece here is stream. So we have this query. We have a cat. It has a name, and then we want to load this list of friends as well. So this is fine if you have a few different friends, but this is my cat Biscuit. He has a lot of different friends. So we can be waiting for all these cats to load forever. All his friends look the same, I guess, too. So the way that stream works here is because we're returning a list here from friends, the stream directive can be added. And this can be added to anything that returns a list. And I can say, all right, give me the first 3, and then we'll load subsequent cats later. So that's what we're doing here with that initial count argument. We're saying, give me 3, then we'll load more and more as time continues. So you can start to see how this works really nicely with a list pattern. List can be any number of values long. Typically, we would handle that with something like pagination, but maybe pagination isn't the right strategy if we still want to load things on the same page. What we'll do here is we'll say load 3, and then we can grab more later. Cool stuff. It also, if we extrapolate this a step further, we can see how these would work together. So we have a stream here. We're going to get the first 3. And then we can load the name of those first 3 cats, and then load all of these extra fields about astrology and cats' bicycles and things like that using defer. So both of these can be used together in the query language. So this is an important thing to know. It's that these are coming to the spec, but also these are going to be added to the query language. So you may have seen schema directives before. These are a little different. These are added to the actual query so that our clients can specify exactly what data they want and they can prioritize it. So recently I found out about this really cool, project. It's called GraphQL Bleeding Edge Playground. So what this is going to do is it's going to allow you to play around with the latest features that are part of the proposed spec, but may not be included in the spec already and may not be included in the libraries that we're used to using. If you're used to using, I don't know, Apollo server, it's not built in yet, but you can still play around with this stuff. So what I did to make this little demo work is literally I downloaded this project. And if you want to try this, that's why I'm telling you about it. I downloaded the project. I opened up this file called definitions here. And this definitions file had a bunch of stuff that I didn't really care about. I wanted to make my own schema. So the schema is being populated with this server folder in the file called schema.ts. Sorry, I should know better than to have a screen look so small. And the schema.ts is going to include everything related to which kinds of objects we want to create. So let's take a look at this in action. Let me get my secret screen of queries over here. And I have this project running on localhost 3000. And the default is that it spins up a graphical instance here so that we can start to test some of those queries. So here's what the query language would look like. We're going to write a query. And if anybody's having trouble seeing, just yell at me in the chat politely or whatever. I don't care. So let's give this an operation name. I'll call it cat information. We're going to query cat information, the field. And then I want to grab name and hanging in there. So these are quick fields that I can grab. But let's say I wanted to grab a couple extra fields, but they may be lower down on the page. They may not be the most important information. So I'm going to call it cat extras. I'll create a GraphQL fragment on the cat type. And I can plug in any one of these fields I want to. Here, I'm going to add favorite color, but we're going to say ... cat extras to plug those in. And then I'll say @defer. And then once I send this query, check it out. I have some data. I have biscuit and hanging in there. And then it had that property called has next that was set to true. So once I have the first initial fields, then it's going to give me back in a second payload the data for this fragment. So let me run it again so we can see it. Has next is this important property. When it's true, it's going to continually fetch data. It's going to continue to fetch any fields that are part of the fragment. Once this has been returned, has next is set to false. Pretty cool stuff. So that's the idea with defer. We can really see how that might work. We saw the little GIF before, prioritizing anything we need. Now, the next thing I want to do is use, let's get rid of this. You can also use the inline fragment syntax. So I could say ... on cat, on the type cat. There we go. Then we will say, what's it called? Favorite color. We obviously want to know that information. And what we need to do here is we need to add the defer. So we'll wait for it. And then we get that back. So either way is fine, whatever you prefer. The separate fragment is a little easier to manage, but this is totally fine too. Now, let's talk a little bit about the stream. The stream is a little different. We're going to call this query streaming cats. And we're going to call this field stream cats. So what does stream cats return? It just returns a bunch of cat names. And the way that we'll access this is we're going to say @stream initial count 1. So this is going to give me one cat with our first request, and then it's going to give me all of the subsequent cats that are part of the array. So remember I said that the stream typically means that we're returning a list. Not typically, it does mean that. And so this is going to work on any iterable value. So let's hit play on streaming cats. We got biscuit. Notice this has next property. Then we got jungle. And then we have Ovi. And then has next is set to false. So we really have 4 different payloads coming back. There's 3 items that are part of the list. And then we're going to return that as a stream. So a lot of the data that we use all over the internet is a list, right? We have a Twitter feed, for example. It has all sorts of different tweets that are returned. Maybe we want to just return the first 10 tweets. Then it'll stream the rest. And this is going to make our application look a lot better because it'll make it look like it's working. We aren't going to have a situation where we are just loading forever and then displaying some information. Instead, we can render something, which is always better than nothing. And then this is going to help us make our UI look like it works much better. So we got our query here with defer. So this is going to kind of hit pause, then go fetch a little bit more data. Now streaming just means that this is going to allow us to render an initial 2 or 3. Let's change this to 2 to see how that works. So this gives us 2 cats. We got 1 more, and then it's false. So lots of possibilities here as we start to incorporate this into our projects. I think more and more of our favorite servers are going to implement this, and I'm ready to use it. I want to use it now. So I encourage you to start playing around with this. So where can you learn more? The defer and stream RFC request for comment is here on the repo. So I'll share a link to my slides in just a second, and all the links are there. But this kind of gets into greater detail about what exactly is included. And I should give a shout out to Liliana Matos and Rob Richard, who work at First Dibs, who are really championing this spec change, and it's going to affect all of us in really nice ways. The other place that you can look is this proposed edits to the spec. If you want to see kind of what's included in the future, there's all sorts of interesting conversations going on over here. So I don't really contribute to the spec myself, but I definitely lurk in these repos and check out what's new. And if you want to try it out, GraphQL Bleeding Edge Playground, you also in the Express GraphQL project, there is a defer and stream branch. And same goes for GraphQL.js. So you can always check this out. And there's a bunch of other ones in GraphQL.js too. So if there's something that you want to kick the tires of, just check out those repos. All right, that is my time for today. I want to thank everybody for being here. You can find me on Twitter or our website, Moon Highway. Check out our mailing list, bit.ly/Moon Highway, for more on GraphQL workshop coming out. And if you have any questions, always feel free to get in touch. I like to talk about GraphQL, so never a bad question. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Eve. That was an insightful talk, and I'm looking forward to diving into defer and the stream directives.
Yeah.
Let's take, do you have a couple of moments to take some questions from the audience?
Sure, yeah.
All right, so we haven't had any come in, but this is your moment now. And let's see if we have any questions come in. Okay, so there's none coming in from the crowd. On that note, maybe I have a quick question. So using these features relies on using WebSockets for the transport layer, if I understand correctly. Or can that be used also with just a simple HTTP connection?
Yeah, really good question. So it's not over WebSockets, just subscriptions are WebSockets. This is actually over HTTP. So instead of thinking about our requests as being a single request and a single response, we're using kind of things that have existed for a while, chunks basically. So sending back these little bits of data that can be returned. So yeah, I think that's one really cool thing is sometimes people are wary of using WebSockets and because it's tricky to scale and you have to have a bit of knowledge about how to keep all that data in sync. This works strictly over HTTP.
Got it. And okay, we have a funny question. Do you think GraphQL is better than REST? Than the REST?
Good question. I think, so I have been quoted on stage as saying GraphQL is better than REST. So if I say it's not, someone will show me a photo of myself saying that. But I do feel like when approaching a project, I tend to reach for GraphQL first versus REST, setting up an API. However, both have their merits. Both can be used really well together. So that's where a lot of people get started with starting their journey with GraphQL is just wrapping their existing REST APIs. So I've evolved my thoughts on this. I think you don't have to burn down REST. We don't have to be mad at REST people. I'm not trying to beef with the REST community. I think we can all coexist nicely and get a lot of cool benefits out of both.
I also imagine that each developer's experience matters a lot. I mean, if you're already quite experienced with GraphQL, then it might be just like, natural for you to pick that. Whereas if you have to learn it in order to implement it in a project, that can send you down a tricky path.
Totally. Yeah, I think I make jokes about this, but like using the thing you know how to use is probably a good place to start because it doesn't mean it's better than anything else, but it does mean you probably will be able to use it more quickly. So I think learning a bit about GraphQL is always a fun idea. And if you're at this meetup, then you're already on the journey. So
And then one last question from Matt Overholt.
Sure.
My question is, how is defer stream different from using, say, a relay paginated query?
Yeah, I think we're thinking about pagination and deferring fields as being two different use cases. Pagination sort of means we're thinking about data as pages. I'm trying not to use the word pages to describe pagination, but we're thinking about the first 10 records and then we grab another 10 and another 10. With defer, we're thinking about how do we prioritize the fields that are coming back. And defer really helps us on a field level, and stream is a little bit different, whereas it, instead of thinking of things as pages, it thinks of things as little chunks.
Got it. Thank you for that. And then one maybe final question we have from Benny. So are you aware of whether or how far along any of the popular servers are in implementing it?
Yeah. So right now the defer and stream stuff is being released as a reference implementation as part of Express GraphQL and GraphQL.js. And when I share my links, those are found in there too. So that'll be a guideline for how other servers should implement. And then once the spec is stable, once the reference implementation is stable, then I would assume that other servers like Apollo server will start walking the road of adding that support to their own servers.
Cool. So Eve, thank you again so much for giving this insightful talk, and hope to see you soon at one of the other meetups.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
All right. So we started off the meetup with a talk by Benny Powers, and we had some technical difficulties. But if you bear with us, we're going to give this another go again now. So we're going to bring Benny to the stage now, and hopefully we're going to remove the video. So unfortunately, you won't be able to see Benny, but hopefully that should work. And if it doesn't, we're going to cut it off, and we'll probably upload the talk after the event. So bear with us, and let's pray to the demo gods. So I'm going to bring Benny. Hey, Benny.
Hey, I'm back. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you well. Do you want to share your screen?
Yeah, let's try.
Are you okay to start again from the beginning?
Yeah, I don't mind that at all. Let's screen back. How am I coming through right now that I'm sharing my screen at the same time?
It's actually sounding pretty good. Let's see if we have any comments coming in. Well, viewers, please be sure to let us know if you're having any difficulties. So I give you the stage now, Benny.
Okay, so let's try this again, okay? And thank you, everybody, for your patience. So we're talking about Apollo Elements, which is a JavaScript library for the front end that implements web components that use GraphQL. So basically, we have base classes, class mix-ins, and other kinds of helpers that support using different web components libraries. What that means is that you can write a GraphQL component once and then use it anywhere in any different framework across multiple teams. Great, I'm really glad this is coming through, and please just let me know if you miss out on something. Feel free to jump in, I can go back. So yeah, it's Apollo clients, but it's web components. So if you're not familiar with what a web component is or how it works, a web component, also known as a custom element, is a JavaScript class that extends from HTML element. And inside of that class, you have these built-in lifecycle callbacks that you can use to attach behaviors to your element, give it its own inner private DOM and styles, and other things like that. So a typical web component usage might be to instantiate it here in the constructor, then attach a shadow root with the attach shadow method on HTML element. And then we're going to give that shadow root some DOM, like this span that just gets the emoji attribute from the element and puts it here in the private DOM, or this empty paragraph with an ID. Now, ordinarily, what we would want to do is use a template element for that, for performance, instead of just inner HTMLing all the things. But in this case, for the sake of brevity, we'll just do that. And then once you pass this class to the custom elements.define method, which is available on the window, and give it a tag name, so that element becomes available for use in your document. So web components, they're just HTML elements. You can put them anywhere. They can interact with the page just like a div or a video element or a list or a details widget, except you are the one that gets to write the behavior of that element. So what would it look like if we wrote custom elements that used GraphQL? Well, a lot of the time we think about GraphQL in terms of queries representing a certain slice of data. So we would want our element to basically provide some UI that is a function of our GraphQL query. The way that we're going to do that with Apollo Elements, a simpler example using just the basic HTML element is with this Apollo query mixin. And by extending from this Apollo query mixin applied to HTML elements, what we'll get is all these extra GraphQL-related behaviors on our elements prototype. So we can assign a GraphQL query to that element. In this case, see, now that I saw the last talk, I feel bad that I chose person for my example, right? Because you've had cats, and like, you know, you can't compete with cats, right? But okay, we're going to go with person. We'll imagine it's a person dressed up as a cat. That'll make us feel better. So we have this person query where we're going to fetch a person by ID, get their name and picture, and a list of friends with each friend's name. And then in this attribute changed callback, which is a built-in lifecycle callback on every custom element, we can check for changes to specific attributes. So we can say if the attribute that changed was person ID, then let's set the variables property. Variables is a property on every Apollo query element. That's something that we get from Apollo query mixin. So every time the person ID changes, we're going to set the variable properties to be the ID of this new person. And that will actually initialize our query, so it'll start going out and fetching our data. Now, what do we do when we get our data back? Well, in order to be able to render out our DOM, we can just set up a getter-setter pair for data. And every time it changes in the setter, we'll call some render function, which we get to define ourselves. In this case, we'll just fill the friends paragraph from before with some text based on the list of friends that we have there. Once we've written this element, we can use it in any web page. All you have to do is bring in the script that defines it and pop it into your page. Give it a person ID, and away you go. You're going to get that DOM on your page. You could use the DOM APIs as well to just insert it. But we're not limited to just using the bare bones custom elements, HTML and DOM APIs, right? Those are very low level, and their custom element APIs are actually intended to be used primarily by libraries. Well, luckily for us, there's a whole ecosystem of web components libraries out there that help us to write our components, and we can use them to write sort of these declarative templates, which match up really nicely with our declarative data that we get from GraphQL. So let's take a look at an example of the same kind of person element that's written using lit element, which is one of the more popular web components libraries. So we're going to grab the base class from lit Apollo, and we're also going to bring in HTML, which is the template tag literal, which lets us do our templating. Also want to bring in a couple extra helpers, custom element to define our element, property to do the data reactivity. Let's import our query, this time using a build step. So we can use rollup or web dev server to let us import GraphQL as JavaScript objects. Same thing for the CSS. And we can bring in these types that we use GraphQL code gen to generate based on our query documents. I really like this style of development because then in your source folder, you get like each component has its own styles, its own template, and its own query. So if you just want to know what the data is for the component, you can open up the query file and see it right there. I think that's a nice experience. So this is what our element might look like if we were defining it with lit element. We can use this custom element TypeScript decorator, which basically does the same thing as the global custom elements define. And instead of extending from HTML element, we'll extend from Apollo query, which in turn inherits from lit element. And we can pass in these TypeScript type arguments, data and variables, which we got from CodeGen. What that'll do is give us like this.data, so we can validate the properties on this.data. And it'll also give us this.variables, which will validate those properties. Inside the class body, by the way, this refers to the element, the actual person element DOM object, the component itself. So this first line of the class body is setting up a reactive property. So we'll call that property person ID. That'll be the name of the property on the element. And we can associate it explicitly with a person-ID attribute. So users of our element could then either set the attribute using HTML, or they could set the property using JavaScript, and both would be fine. We can apply our styles to the element, and then we'll set up this updated callback, which comes from lit element. And every time the person ID changes, just like we did before, we'll set the variables property and start to query our data. All we have left to do is render our template, and that'll look like this. We can grab our name and our friends off of data.person, right? And we'll have that nice type checking from the TypeScript types. And we can render out our template, a paragraph with ID of friends, and we'll map out our list of friends. Now, you might be kind of getting spidey sense watching me use IDs freely in reusable components. Say, hey, well, what if there's another element on the page with ID of friends? Well, thanks to the shadow DOM that we talked about earlier, this ID is local to our component, so it's isolated. If you would call document.getElement by ID friends, you wouldn't get it. So we can do whatever we want here in our shadow DOM. That's one of the benefits of web components. I wanted to show you an example of how to do this same component, but instead of using lit element, using Haunted, which is kind of an implementation of a React hooks API, but for web components. And we support that in Apollo elements as well. So if you're used to, or you prefer to use a hooks-like syntax and you want to, call a use query and get your data that way, you can do that as well. And you get that same sort of declarative templating that you would expect to get from, like, say, JSX or another templating language, here just using vanilla JavaScript. And that brings us to mutations, right? Because we don't want to just read data with our components. We also sometimes want to affect the graph as well. So in Apollo elements, we have 3 options for making mutations. There's an Apollo mutation component, which comes ready-made with a bunch of features that give you the ability to issue mutations. We have, for the different web components libraries, an Apollo mutation base class or the mutation mixin, or in the case of Haunted, the use mutation hook. Or you can always just get a handle on your Apollo client instance and call and mutate imperatively. Actually, at work, I'm using all 3 of these methods depending on the situation. But right now, I just want to go right now into the Apollo mutation component to see how that works and how we can do declarative GraphQL mutations using nothing but HTML. So if we import our component and we set it here on the page, we can actually just pass in a GraphQL script element as a child and set the mutation property on the component that way. If we do that, the component will get its mutation property just from this child element. You don't have to use HTML for this. You can also set the mutation property using the DOM, like through a framework or something like that. But this is a really nice way if you just want to sort of declaratively put a mutation in your document. You can just plop the script tag in there and away you go. But what about the variables, right? So we have an input object here, which is a quote input. How are we going to set those variables? Well, we can bring in an input web component, let's say. And if we put it in the variable slot, which you can see here on the second line, slot equals variable. Slot is a web components feature. So that says that this element here slots into a specific name slot on the parent, on the Apollo mutation component. So if we put this in the variable slot and give it a data variable attribute, then our component, when it issues the mutation, it'll say, oh, I have a variable called name. And the value for that variable should be the value of this text field. So whatever the user types into that text field will be the value for that variable. We can do the same thing for comment. And now, how are we going to trigger our mutation and actually send off our variables to the endpoint? Well, we can just slot in a trigger button component, and we'll be good to go. You might have noticed, though, that the mutation that we have has one variable called input. It doesn't have two, one called name and one called comment. So what we can do is add an input key attribute to the mutation element, and that will tell it that all of the variables that you see on the text fields, you should wrap them up into an object called input. That'll give us this as our final variables. So here we have a GraphQL mutation, and we haven't written a single line of JavaScript. So one of the main benefits to web components is that you can use them anywhere, right? Like you can write them using lit element and use them in a haunted application, or you can write them using hybrids and use them in a Microsoft Fast application. And you can also use them in sort of traditional DOM frameworks. So here's an example of a couple web components I wrote before. SpaceX launches. This queries the SpaceX GraphQL API and gets a list of launches. And this other one here, SpaceX launch, displays a specific launch by ID, right? And what we're going to do is have Angular communicate with both of these elements via events and DOM properties. So if I select a launch from the dropdown, looks like that's a big if today. Okay, so our component is querying the SpaceX API. So we have 0 launches, everything's loading, great. Yeah, so if we select, let's say, demo set, then this paragraph right here, which is rendered by Angular, it's not rendered by my web component, it's rendered by Angular. That'll be there. And then down here, this other GraphQL component written using Apollo Elements is getting its launch ID from that list up here via Angular. And it can then query for the details on that element. And this same exact web component, which is published to NPM, we can use it in a Preact app as well, or in a Svelte app. And it'll work the same way. So if your company has maybe a GraphQL team, or maybe a UI team, UI components team, you could publish privately or even publicly a collection of GraphQL web components that could be used across multiple different teams, across multiple different frameworks, in different micro front ends. Sky's the limit. There's a lot more going on in Apollo Elements. Like we have a generator, kind of like Create React app, that you can use to initialize an entire application or to add a component to an already initialized application. We have got an Apollo client component, which lets you easily assign a specific Apollo client to a specific instance of a web component. So like in this demo, we have 2 different clients, one that's going to the SpaceX API and one that's going to the Rick and Morty API. And they both have the same introspection query component underneath, which just renders an introspection query. So if we run this demo, we'll see that they should go and get different data from the respective clients. Makes me think of like loading up old video games or reticulating splines. What was that? Was that StarCraft? Gosh, I can't remember. Okay, I think maybe our demo server's not loading the fastest today, but you get the idea. What you should expect to see here is the different introspection queries for each different API. Yeah, so we have an extensive documentation site for Apollo Elements. If you want to learn more, check it out at apolloelements.dev. We've got guides, we've got extensive API docs. And I'd love to hear from you. You can join me on the Polymer Slack, on Discord, file issues, join the discussion. I'd be happy to hear from you.
Thank you, Benny.
You're welcome.
Benny, can you hear me? Yeah, okay, I got it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for the talk. I think there's a bunch of questions that already come up, and we had Sonia already asked in the chat one of the questions. So what are the benefits of using such a GraphQL custom web component over a React component?
Okay, that's a great question, Sonia. So like most things, it depends on what your specific needs are, right? So like if you have a huge React app and all of your developers are React developers, so maybe you should just keep writing React, right? But on the other hand, so a lot of the benefits of web components and custom elements are some of the things that I mentioned before. So we have framework interoperability, we have DOM encapsulation via the shadow DOM, we have things like future-proofing. So I'm still using web components from like 4 years ago in my apps, and maybe they could be improved, or the performance could be improved or something like that. But however they're implemented internally doesn't really bother me, because they can have their own internal mechanisms and update at their own slow pace. As long as the external HTML and DOM APIs stay the same, I'm golden, and I can use it in my super modern, TypeScript everything apps today. So those are some of the big benefits of web components. And like we've seen, you can write your GraphQL web components using Apollo Elements, and then you can use them in React, right? So you could do that also with React in just sort of like vanilla JavaScript or web components-based apps, but it'd be a little harder to do. You'd have to do a little bit more fancy footwork in order to hook things up together.
And what would you recommend? Because it seems like web components has not quite caught up in terms of popularity and adoption compared to a lot of the framework approach. So what would be your recommendation for someone sort of new to web components, especially coming from frameworks like Vue and React?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm not really sure where this perception of like nobody uses web components comes from, because really a lot of people use web components. Google, obviously, Google kind of invented web components. It was a Google project, but now it's an open standard. Adobe ships web components. Microsoft has their own web components library. Apple ships web components. They're all over the place. And in terms of what I'd recommend to developers who are starting out, who maybe have a background in frameworks, is I'd say if you have the time to learn and you're curious and you want to try something new, give it a shot. I can tell you that I learned a lot about React and frameworks from building web components. Right? So seeing how it's done using the built-in browser APIs and platform gave me a lot of insights into how it could be done in frameworks. And once I got kind of up to speed in that component-based mentality, I wrote those 5 demos with Angular, React, Preact. It's all kind of the same thing. It's just kind of juggling syntax. So I would recommend, and I wholeheartedly suggest, that everyone try it out. Maybe do a side project in Lit Element or something like that. Maybe you'll like it.
Great. I don't see any. We have a question. I'm not sure if you want to tackle this, but perhaps you want to give this a go. What are the best practices in using GraphQL in Vue.js? Is that something that you have an opinion on?
Sure. Well, I think you should write your GraphQL components in Apollo Elements and then use those in Vue.js, right? I mean, I'm biased, right? But there really isn't anything stopping you from doing that. So you could do that. I know there are GraphQL libraries for Vue, and that's good too. If that works for you and your team, go for it. And you know what? You can also use Apollo. There's like a third-party Apollo Vue library. Apollo owns this third-party also, by the way. It's not an Apollo thing. So you could use the Apollo Vue library, and you could also use Apollo elements for a specific component or something like that. There's really nothing stopping you. It's all about that mix and match kind of Lego experience of putting things together.
Gotcha. Great. Well, thank you so much for joining. Thank you for everyone who participated in the questions. And Benny, I hope to see you soon at one of our future meetups, maybe.
Thank you.
All right. So at this point, we're going to, I'm going to do a bit of a short introduction of Prisma. And for that, I will share my screen. And that will be followed by our quiz. So we're going to do the quiz in one go, and the quiz will involve questions from all the different talks, the 2 different talks, and also Prisma-related questions. Seeing as I've mentioned, let me just get my notes here. Seeing as I've mentioned Prisma, I think this is a good moment to introduce. So we have a lot of viewers joining from a lot of different walks of engineering. And yeah, let's talk about Prisma. So what is Prisma? Prisma, in case you're not familiar, is a next generation ORM for Node.js and TypeScript. And working with relational databases is a major bottleneck in application development. Debugging SQL queries or complex ORM objects often consume hours of development time. What Prisma tries to do is it tries to make it easy for developers to reason about their database queries by providing a clean and type-safe API for submitting database queries, which returns simple, plain old JavaScript objects. And Prisma currently supports MySQL, Postgres, Microsoft SQL, and SQLite. And Prisma consists of 3 main tools. The first one is Prisma Client. This is the intuitive and type-safe ORM for interacting with your database. This is what you would use in your Node.js project. Prisma Migrate is a database migration tool that makes evolving your database schema a breeze. And finally, Prisma Studio is a modern database GUI for interacting with your data. So what are some of the benefits of Prisma? Well, Prisma tries to achieve higher productivity and increased confidence, and it does that in a bunch of different ways. The first one is thinking in objects. So Prisma really works with objects rather than trying to map relational data. This is why all your queries, in order to query, you just use objects to select the different bits of data that you're interested in, and it also just returns objects. Second thing is Prisma Client. Prisma Client focuses on queries rather than classes. So there's no model classes in Prisma, and this avoids a lot of the complex model objects that you end up with other ORMs. And then the third thing is that you have type-safe database queries that can be validated at compile time. This uses this single source of truth called the Prisma schema, which is used for your database and your application model. So you have this single source of truth that can be used for both creating your database schema in MySQL, Postgres, or MS SQL. And then that same Prisma schema is also used for generating Prisma Client. And this is really one of the nice things about Prisma, is that you don't really have to write a lot of the ORM code because it's generated based on your Prisma schema. Now, you can use this to do a lot of different things. The main point here is that it's technology agnostic and works with any API technology. So if you're building a REST API, a GraphQL API, or you are using a gRPC for perhaps inter-service communication, you can do all of that and use that with Prisma. And finally, since this is a GraphQL meetup, I'm sure many of you are building GraphQL APIs using many different technologies. And I just wanted to point out that we have a page. We'll also drop the link in the comment. And that explains all of the different ways that you can use Prisma to integrate and build a GraphQL API. And finally, you can also use this page to order free Prisma with GraphQL stickers. Now, if you're getting started with Prisma, Dr. Steven Jensen has recently published a new course in Udemy, and that is called End-to-End React with Prisma 2. And you can gain access for free using the code that we have on the screen. We'll also drop the code so that you can get access to the course for free in the comments. And that was it in terms of Prisma. If you have any questions, I think now would be a good moment. Otherwise, I think we can go ahead and start the quiz. So we've already had Pedro, Joaquin, Kevin, and Sonia join the quiz. And if you haven't joined already, you can go ahead and do that by going to slido.com and entering GraphQL, or by scanning the QR code. So let's wait for some more of you to join it. It should be activated so anyone can join it. And a quick reminder that the winner of this quiz will win access to Wes Boss's new course. Okay, I see we have more people joining. And then the two runner-ups to the winner will get some Prisma swag. So we'll send you some stickers and a Prisma t-shirt. Great. So I hope you paid attention throughout the event. Again, sorry for some of the technical difficulties that we've had, but we're here now. And if you've made it this long, get ready for some of the questions, because they're going to cover Eve's talk, Benny's talk, and also some Prisma stuff. Okay, someone already bought the course. Well, Dale, if you win the first place, I'm sure we can find something else to get you. Okay, already have 15 people who have joined. I'm going to wait 15 more seconds to let any of you who haven't joined yet join. All right. Okay, I think we should get started. So our very first question is, which answer is correct? You can use Apollo elements with lit elements only, in any framework, or with no framework. And the third option is alongside other Apollo client implementations. Remember, the quicker you answer, the higher chances you have of winning. Okay, we have 7 of you who've answered already. Whoop. And let's wait for the 15. Okay, let's see. So 47% of you went for the second option, in any framework or with no framework. However, the correct answer was the first one, with lit element only. Let's move on to the next question. So we have Rico, who's leading the charge, followed by Ola Doten and Sonia. Okay, which web components library emulates React hooks? Spooked, Tulu, or Haunted? And 8 of you have answered already. Let's see if we can get the whole 15. Okay, so most of you voted for Haunted, and indeed that was the correct answer. And we have Ruby still leading the charge, followed by Sonia and Yash. This brings us to the third question. This is also the last question about this talk. Is adopting Apollo elements an exclusive all or nothing choice? And 10 of you have answered. Let's see if we can get the whole 15. And let's close it. Most of you said no, and indeed you were correct. Okay, let's move on to the next question. And we have Rico, who's still leading, followed by Sonia and Yash. Remember, everything can still change. Okay, now this is from Eve's talk. Where in a query do you use the defer directive? As a variable and as an argument on an inline fragment, or you can't yet? Okay, 9 of you have answered. 11. Let's see if we can get to 15. And so most of you said on an inline fragment, or you can't yet. And the correct answer was on an inline fragment. Yash is leading, followed by Doug, Tangerine, and Kevin. Okay, what is a subscription? Why is a subscription different than a stream? First option is it's intended for a long-lived connection. Second, it works over WebSockets. Third, it doesn't use a directive. Fourth, all of the above. All right. So most of you chose all of the above, and indeed you were correct. Yash is leading the charge, followed by Doug, Tangren, and Kevin. Let's see if this changes. Which property, if set to true, indicates that there is more data to load in a stream? More, has next, loading, or info? Okay, 9 of you have answered. 11. And we're going to close in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so most of you chose has next, which indeed was the correct answer. So Yash is leading, followed by Kevin, followed by Sonia. We have 2 more questions. And now for the Prisma-related questions. Which database is not supported by Prisma? Okay, we'll close it in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Amazon Redshift, 77% of you chose that and were correct. So Yash is still leading, followed by Kevin and Sonia. It's a tight race, and things might change now when I flip over to the final question of our quiz for today. And that is, which one of the following tools is currently not part of the Prisma toolkit? Now, if some of you know what Prisma Lens is, feel free to drop the answer in the comments. And 77% of you chose Prisma Lens. Oh, that seems to be a mistake. Indeed, it was Prisma Lens. I'm not sure what happened there. Okay. Not sure what happened there. I think it was a technical error. Let's see. Not sure if we can correct that. Really sorry about that. We'll try and see what we can work out with that. But we have Yash who won, followed by Kevin and Alex. We'll see if we can redact the response for the last question. Let me double check that. Okay, I'll save that. And let's see if that updates the leaderboard. Okay. Leaderboard. Okay, I think this was corrected now. So Yash won the first place, followed by Kevin and Sonia. So you are the winners. So congratulations, Yash. You won the course, and Kevin and Sonia, you will get some Prisma swag sent to you. So feel free to reach out already to Natalia. You can reach out to her on Twitter, or you can reach out to me on Twitter. And now I'd like to also mention, okay, let's see if I can move forward with this. Yes. Okay, so I wanted to also announce that we have the next edition of the Prisma Online Meetup that will take place on the 9th of March, which is next week. And we have 3 speakers who are going to be joining us for the event. The first speaker is going to be Alex Debris, who will advise you on picking a database for your serverless applications in 2021. That will be followed by Prisma's Tim Zuchanek, our very own, who will speak about Prisma in React server components. And that will be followed by the last talk by Matija Sosik, who will give a talk about WASP, a DSL for building web apps with Prisma, React, and Node.js. So on that note, I'd like to thank you. If you've made it this far, thank you for tuning to the GraphQL Berlin Meetup. We'd appreciate it also if you can make our events better by providing us feedback. And you can do that by answering a couple more questions in the Slido, which I will activate now. It seems that I can't activate all of them. So let's see. Okay, I can't activate all of them, but if you have any feedback, feel free to send it either via Slido. We have the, let's see, we have the rating and how did you find out. Actually, we'll just leave the open text poll. Please feel free to submit any of your suggestions and ideas and what you thought about this meetup. So on that note, thank you for joining, and we'll see you at the next time.